Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. How is everybody? It sounds like 7:30, but it's 9:30. How is everybody? Yes, wonderful. Thank you so much. So this is also a transfer of energy, what we just did. And for me, this is one of the most important energies that a human can ever get. And that is positivity, because positivity inspires us so much to do things and go beyond ourselves. So thank you so much for being here. It's an honor to be here and to be allowed by the organization. Thank you so much for opening this stage during this conference. So we're going to talk about energy and reimagining energy because, although I have a big smile when I come up here, you can say that there is a bit of a crisis in energy land right now. Would you agree? Who agrees that we are in an energy crisis today? I think many, many of us, right? Now, which ones of you have ever experienced a crisis in their lives? Like in work, in your personal life? I think many. I've experienced this crisis myself. So which ones of you during that crisis thought, well, this is convenient, it fits my schedule perfectly? Nobody does that, right? So crises, they hit us when we do not want them, and then we have to deal with them. And with energy today, the same is happening exactly. And if you look at the prices, for example, and this is the Dutch TTF gas price, which went up almost 1,100% in 1 year time. So this is the trade price of gas. Same goes for many parts of Europe. If you look at other price developments, this is actually a retail company for energy in the Netherlands that by now is almost asking €5 for 1 cubic meter of gas, more than €1 for 1 kilowatt hour of electricity. Now, who's going to be able to pay that? Already, acquaintances of mine, like this one, they got their annual settlement bill and they were asked to pay €11,755 on top of their monthly energy bills. And please pay that within 2 weeks, because otherwise we're going to cut you off. So, and this is a regular house in the Netherlands. Now, we could have seen this coming from before, because this was what happened in Texas about 1 year ago, when they had a winter storm which caused blackouts in Texas. They didn't expect the cold. Many people there were actually on a variable price plan for their energy. 248 people died during that blackout, and most of them because they had no access to energy or had no means to pay energy. And many of them that survived still have energy bills and debts that are in the thousands and tens of thousands of dollars. Now, this is 1 year ago, but even 20 years ago in California, we had a company called Enron. Enron, strategically, were very good. Ethically, they were very bad. And what basically happened there was they strategically planned maintenance on power lines and on power plants during the moments that the need for energy was the highest. Because if they planned their maintenance when the need was the highest, they knew that the price would be the highest on the market, which means that they made the most profit. Now, this is 20 years ago, and today we see the exact same thing from another company in another country that is applying the same techniques to hike their price up. And this is exactly what's happening to the Nord Stream pipelines for natural gas throughout Europe. So if we look at the news today, we can come to the conclusion that the energy market can be considered broken. The market, as we designed it, does not function in favor of the people. We can also see that laws and regulations, and I work a lot in laws and regulations in the Netherlands, and I've done so a lot in Brussels also for the European Commission, they are unfit for today and tomorrow. So we see laws and regulations in terms of energy that are not fit with our reality of today. They don't help us to fulfill our energy needs in a proper way that is payable, that is affordable, that is accessible for all of us. We also see that society is demanding structural solutions right now because we cannot hold it anymore as individual users. And we see an energy sector that lacks the ability to adapt and innovate. And it makes sense because if you have invested billions and billions into the system that is today, then it's very difficult to change that system. because you need to get that money back first. And we also see that more and more Europeans are working 1 day, 1.5 days per week to pay their energy bills with the energy prices of today. Which means that you're not working for your employer anymore, you're working for your energy supplier. That's your actual employer. So this is a very harsh reality. And even if we look at this, this is not even the biggest chunk of the energy crisis that we're in. The biggest part of the energy crisis that we're in has to do with combustion. And why does it have to do with combustion? Because of the speed at which fossil fuels were built up by our planet through photosynthesis, billions of years, actually 500 million years it took around for this planet to build up our reserves for oil and coal and gas. So it started with plants, photosynthesis. Plants actually died at some point, then they went into the ground, they were converted into oil and coal and gas. That process took about 500 million years for the reserves that we have today. It takes us around 500 years to finish those reserves by combusting them, by putting them on fire. So that means that we use 1 million times more fossil fuels than the Earth can replenish at this same moment. So imagine that we have to use 1 million times less fossil fuels compared to today. Imagine that you're driving a car, a gasoline-powered car, a diesel-powered car. Right now, we are doing 1 liter per 15 kilometers, something like that. Imagine that you'll have to design a car that does 1 liter for 15 million kilometers. That's the challenge that we have today, energy-wise. So it's a massive, massive challenge, and we cannot get there with the thinking and the systems of today. We have to redesign and rethink our systems. Still, the reality is that globally, 2.5 billion people live in what we call energy poverty. They have to rely on collecting biomass to fulfill their very basic energy needs. This kitchen is actually the kitchen of the mother of my best friend in my youth, Madame Kimba. My best friend's name was Omar. He passed away. They live in Niger, in West Africa. I grew up in Niger, in West Africa, one of the most energy-poor countries in the world. And I learned a lot about energy there. I lived there until I was 11 years old because my parents were development workers. And Niger is a conflict area. And the strange thing about Niger is that it's also one of the places where we get a lot of energy from, and I'll get back to that later. Energy and poverty are very closely interrelated. Why? Because if you live in energy poverty and you have to collect biomass to fulfill your basic energy needs, it usually means that you have to go out to find that wood that you're going to set on fire. Finding that wood costs time. And the time that mainly the women in these societies have to spend on fulfilling their energy needs is between 30 and 50% of their waking hours. So imagine that you, alive here, 16 hours awake per day, 8 hours of sleep per day, you'll have to spend 5-6 hours every day to look for your energy. Now, all that time you cannot spend on earning an income. You cannot spend it on attaining an education. You cannot spend that time on raising your children or being with your loved ones. So that means that if you live in energy poverty, you're going to remain poor until the moment that you get access to modern forms of energy. And this is what makes us in this part of the world so lucky, because we have access to modern forms of energy, which means that we have the opportunity to not be poor. Now, many of these modern forms of energy, though, are closely related to conflict. If we look at the Global Peace Index, which is a global data set that is being analyzed every year and updated every year, this is the last update, the 2022 Global Peace Index. It reads very easily. There's a lot of data behind this. But it basically says, if you live in a green-colored country, you feel very lucky to live there. If you live in a red-colored country, you're going to do everything within your power to make it green or to move to a green country. That's basically what this map says. Now, it's interesting to see, if you do an overlay on this map, of all the places where we get the most fossil fuels from. The most fossil fuels that we use come from conflict areas. It basically says that fossil energy and war are inseparably connected. Over 90% of the wars, of the international conflicts that we have fought in the past century had to do more or less with energy resources, with ownership of energy resources, with which company can put which flag on which oil field. As simply put as that. And Niger is one of these conflicted areas that we get a lot of uranium from. So this is actually a picture that my mother took in my youth. I'm the little boy in the middle. This is my brother Omid. This is our neighbor Amadou. We're watching television. In the town that we lived in, there were 2 televisions, so we were the rich ones. We had electricity and we had a television. And that was amazing. Now, watching television still was a big thing, though, because there was only one national broadcast at that time. They had shows 3 times per week for 1 hour, and we could watch these shows if there was electricity at that moment. So we could actually sit in front of the switch, then flick it, then something would happen or nothing would happen. It was a 50-50 chance. So for us, energy was not a given in our youth. And still, if you look at Niger today, so it's this beautiful large country. It's about 4 times the surface of France. And we used to live right in the middle, somewhere around there. You see that still today, only 16% of the people in Niger have access to modern forms of energy. 16%. So 84% of the people lives in energy poverty. And that puts Niger right here. So these are all the countries in the world, and Niger is the number 7 from the bottom in terms of energy access. But in terms of energy resources, extremely rich, but because it's the 4th largest uranium exporter in the world. And all that uranium is actually mined here around the Aïr Massif in Arlit. So there are huge uranium mines there. And Niger is actually the largest exporter of uranium to Europe. So most of the uranium that we are using here in Europe comes from Niger. Almost all the uranium that's being used in France comes from Niger. Niger doesn't really get paid for it because it's owned by a state company from France, Areva. And if you look at the imports, again, of uranium, you see that a lot of it also comes from Russia, a lot of it comes from Kazakhstan, and then there's some other countries, Australia, Canada. A little bit comes from the EU itself. And so you see that even these resources mainly come from conflicted areas. And we have to bear that in mind when we plan our long-term strategies for energy. Where does the resource come from? Energy globally is not fairly divided. Some people live in energy wealth, some people live in energy poverty. If you look at the average citizen of the United States, per capita, they have 10 times more energy than the average citizen of India. The average citizen of India has 10 times more energy than the average citizen of Niger. So that means that in Niger, people have to work with 100 times less energy than the average American. But still, we expect the same things from them. You have to save energy, you have to contribute to the economy, you have to do this, you have to do that. Now, how is that possible with 1% of the energy budget that we have in the rest of the world? Slovakia is pretty much in the middle of Europe, which is very healthy, actually. So there's a healthy energy budget per capita in Slovakia. Actually, my wife and I had the opportunity to travel through this country, this beautiful country, in the past week. You might believe it or not, but this last week was our honeymoon. So we got married a week and a half ago, and we traveled through this beautiful country, and we went through the... Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So we got to know a little bit more about this country, and for me that is so valuable, because you know it's so easy to come in, do your talk, then go back again, and as if nothing happened. But for me it's so valuable to get to know a little bit of the country before you stand in front of an audience and tell a story. So and we are falling in love with this country because it's so rich in so many ways. Resource-wise, nature-wise, the beauty of it, the beauty of the people. So there's so much that you can be so proud of and so grateful for in Slovakia. Now, if we go back to Niger, this is energy reality in Niger. So if you have no access to electricity, but you do have a mobile phone, this is where you charge it. So they have these kiosks by the side of every street where you pay an amount of money, and then you plug it in. You see this beautifully engineered AC outlets. Yes, I know you love this kind of engineering. And then on the other end, there is a diesel generator. So this electricity is generated by diesel. Now, more and more of these kiosks, and this is a very, very good development, are being converted into solar. And you know what happens when these kiosks convert to solar? Now, with diesel, you buy the generator, and then every day you have to buy new diesel to power your generator. So that means that you always have to spend a part of your income on diesel. 30% actually of their income. Solar, you buy your installation once, then you run it. Now, the sun is not billing you for solar light, right? So it just hits your solar panels and you can do your business. The income of these kiosk owners that convert to solar increases by 30% because of that conversion. So that's one of the opportunities of solar. And not only that, but if you look at Niger, the mobile phone grid is solar powered. Why? Because in countries in sub-Saharan Africa, there's no interconnected energy grid that connects all these towns and villages to one another. So that means that they had to come with local solutions for powering the mobile phone grid to ensure that everybody had 4G and 5G even in parts of Niger right now, but all the country has 4G. So it's all solar powered. And Niger also holds the second best solar potential globally in terms of the amount of sunlight that's hitting the Earth's surface. I'm actually new in the field of energy myself. I started in energy in 2006. Before that, I actually worked in online technology. So I was in internet development. Prior to that, I was actually raised as and educated as a musician. So I had a bit of a funny background. But in 2006, I entered in the field of energy. And in 2007, I saw this image for the first time. It was shown to me by Larry Stout. At that time, he was the director of the Irish Energy Institute, the Dundalk Institute of Technology. And he looked at me and he asked me, "What do you see here?" And of course, I could think a lot of things. What do you see here? If I ask you, what does this image say? Do you have an idea? Yes? I'm hearing hints, I'm hearing hints. So if I give you the hint that this is a timeline, then what are we looking at here? This is exactly the fossil energy consumption spike that we are looking at. And for me, it blew my mind, because in 2007, I regarded fossil fuels as a given, as a fact of life. But if you look at this image, you realize that actually for most of the time, we have used renewable resources to discover new continents, to make fire and cook. I'm from the Netherlands. The windmills, very well-known renewable energy resource that we had in the Netherlands. And it wasn't until the 1850s that we started to industrialize. So we actually worked with renewables for thousands of years before we started to use fossil fuels en masse. And now we are here, at the peak. This is what most scientists more or less agree on. So that means that we are decarbonizing industries, which does not mean that we deindustrialize and we go back in time, but we are actually going forward. And now who knows what we're going to use in the next years. So this peak blew my mind because it actually showed that throughout the history and future of mankind, the conventional energy source is always renewable. The alternative energy source is non-renewable, is fossil. Until around the 1850s, we used predominantly renewable energies. This is actually the side of the Zaan River by which I was born. It doesn't look like this anymore, but still there's a couple of these windmills for museum value. But basically what happened there was we had to depend on the rhythm of nature. If the wind is blowing, then we use it. If it's not blowing, then we don't use it. But this is how we learned to build ships, to saw wood, to make paint, to make mustard, to do all these things. But you use what you get. Then we got into industrialization, and then you see that this was the rise of energy on demand at the flick of a switch. So you press a button and then there's energy, if you live in an energy-rich country. And energy became a tradable commodity. And also we started to see energy conflicts because we had to get hold of the resources. And now we're moving into the digital era, which I would call renewables 2.0. Because for the first time in our existence as humans, we can use renewable energies at the flick of a switch. And we can use them in high concentrations. And we can power industrial processes with them. So this is a beautiful development. And it also means that peer-to-peer and decentralized become the new standards. Last April, I had an amazing opportunity. I was in India to meet with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and a couple of other beautiful people. Actually, the former environmental minister of your neighboring country was there also, Martin Bursik of the Czech Republic. And also behind there was Kim Stanley Robinson, whom I met. And we discussed digitalization. The Dalai Lama actually loves technology. He's very fond of technology. So we discussed digitalization, we discussed energy, we discussed climate issues, and we discussed also the fact that energy should be regarded a universal human right, which is beautiful. Now, with Kim Stanley Robinson, who is a sci-fi writer, who is standing very humbly in the back there, I took hikes. So we went into the Himalaya foothills and we walked together for hours and hours and hours, and we discussed all things that matter to us and that we deemed important. And well, he's a soulmate. He's an amazing guy. He wrote a beautiful book that I can recommend to all of you, The Ministry for the Future. Now, it's a beautiful book. It's sci-fi, but it's not sci-fi. And that's the scary thing of it, because the start of the book, the first chapter, starts in India with a heat wave that have massive impacts on the people of India. Many people die, etc., etc. Now, as Stan and I were in India, we actually saw a heat wave, 47 degrees in April, 62 degrees ground temperature, which is killing all the crops. And it's happening right now. So unfortunately, his sci-fi is no longer sci-fi. It became reality. And we need to deal with that. But I am also here to tell you that we have massive opportunities to deal with it. Now, whom else did I derive inspiration from in my life? This beautiful person, Nikola Tesla, who once said, if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy and frequency and vibration. And I already mentioned to you very briefly that I was actually educated as a musician, and I love this quote as a musician also, because music in itself is also about energy and frequency and vibration. And it's about harmonization. And I see in our energy practice the exact same principles applicable. So if we try to understand what energy is, and this was a question that I started to ask about 16, 17 years ago, I got answers that sounded like this, and these were energy professionals, of course. And then we had an office in Barcelona, they gave this answer. So we don't really know what energy is. What is energy? It's a vague concept. You know, there's always going to be someone who says energy equals mc squared, but then again, you know, try and explain that, and you get into very scientific explanations. But we want energy to be understandable for everybody. Now, we actually studied energy in a way to be able to frame it and explain it non-scientifically, but correct. And energy is nothing more than the ability to do work. It's the ability to get things done. And if you want to put it more scientifically correct, you say it's the ability to do work over time. It's as simple as that. This is energy. But it also means that energy, if that is the ability to do work, is pretty important in our societies. Because work creates value. And you can say that energy is actually the currency of the real economy. Think of it. Everything that we touch, everything that we use or make or exchange, everything that we throw away, everything that we produce, every kind of value that we ever create has its origins in flows and conversions of energy. Energy is the foundation of our economy. Energy is the foundation of our society. Energy flows are the foundation of every natural process. So this is how important energy is. It's very imaginable that we can run an energy system if there would be no banks. But try and run a bank without an energy system. That's never going to happen. So in the beginning, you have to take care of a functioning energy system before you take care of anything else. And what we also see is that what this energy transition needs, if you look at this from a fundamental level, is a different mindset. Now, this is another author that I want to recommend to you. His name is Richard Buckminster Fuller. Has any one of you read books of Buckminster Fuller? You have. Wonderful. Congratulations to you. Then I know that your language is pretty okay. So if you take 1 year off, you have to read his books. I can recommend them to you. In 1969, he wrote a very little book titled Operation Manual for Spaceship Earth. And in Operation Manual for Spaceship Earth, he said, you never change things by fighting the existing reality. If you want to change something, build a new model that makes the old model obsolete. Now, I love this quote. It almost became a life mantra for me, personally. Why? Because I have a certain amount of energy that I can spend every day. I eat around 1.3 kilowatt hours of food every day. That's what I do. I calculated that. And I can spend that on either telling what's wrong with the world or trying to build what might work in the world. So instead of fighting the existing reality, I want to build new models that might make the old model obsolete. So that's what we dedicate ourselves to in our work. And a new model that makes the old model obsolete is what I framed as the Internet of Energy back in 2016. Internet is a beautiful concept. Do you know the Internet, by the way? It's an amazing thing. If you don't know it, I can highly recommend it. Now, what is the history of Internet? If you look at the history of Internet, in 1973, it wasn't called Internet yet, it was called ARPANET. Globally, we had 36 users. I was raised by an Internet pioneer, my mother, who went online in the late 1980s. She was one of the first to go online in Europe, communicating with her friends and peers globally, doing her activism work, which she was very good at. She was actually striding for women's rights, and she used the internet for that. And it was all DOS-based on these old, crunchy modems. So that's how I got to know the internet. Now, in 1989, Tim Berners-Lee wrote the www protocol. And what is so beautiful about the www protocol? A few things. One is, it's ownerless. Nobody owns the protocol. It's owned by all of us. So it's your www protocol, and it's mine, it's all of us. And it's governed by the W3 coalition. Now, also, the other beautiful thing about the Internet Protocol, the www protocol, is that regardless of which technology you choose to use, regardless of the place in which you are, you can communicate with each other and you can translate data from one technology into another. So if you send an image to somebody else, you don't have to look where they are and what kind of device they're holding, but they will be able to see that image in almost real time. And that makes it possible for us to interconnect the world. And that really caused something, because last April, from 36 users in 1973, we welcomed the 5 billionth internet user in the world. So this is massive, massive growth. Within 50 years, we went from 36 users to 5 billion internet users. And this meant that instead of being consumers of knowledge and data, we became prosumers. So instead of having to rely on the old encyclopedia, which contained a lot of information, but it wasn't our information, it went through publishers in a centralized system, it took years to update, we all have Wikipedia now. And we have all these other media right now on the internet which enable us to be parts of a global system that we all maintain and all update all the time. So we became prosumers instead of consumers, producers and users at the same time. And now with the energy transition, we're making the same movement because we're moving from centralized systems to decentralized systems to distributed systems. A centralized system in real life looks more or less like this. And our current centralized system is perfectly designed for one-way traffic. One-way traffic of energy where you have a power plant and then lots of users, and as long as they pay their bills, it will work. But through decentralization, where we use, for example, solar panels, this is the rooftop of Rotterdam Central Station in the Netherlands where I have my offices, we see that the movement is being made possible to produce energy locally. And you see that if you look at the markets for solar, for example, if you look at the markets for batteries and EVs, and you see the price developments of solar and you see the price developments of batteries and EVs, then you see that there's a huge market potential there. But it also causes a lot of stress on the system because our centrally designed system cannot handle two-way traffic. And this, in parts of Europe and also in the Netherlands, where I come from, you see is causing a lot of stress. By now, already on more 40% of the country's surface, we're not allowed to install new solar panels or wind turbines. Why? Because we are causing stress on the system by doing that. So that means that we need to redesign the system. And still, if we look at that, we are very fortunate, because in our country and in most European countries, we have very, very little downtime on our electricity grids. 24 minutes per year, which equals a 99.9954% uptime. In the US, it's about 5 times more, 138 minutes without electricity per year. In a country like Niger, still today, we have 1,400 hours without electricity per year, which is 4 hours every day. So we are still very fortunate, but we need to deal with it. And we deal with it by going to distributed networks instead of decentralized networks. And a distributed network, if you look at it, you can no longer tell who is a producer and who is a consumer, because everything can be anything. And now this is a, by design, peer-to-peer system which uses digital technologies to interconnect everything with everything. It's a multi-carrier system. Multi-carrier means it's not about electricity alone, it's also about gases like hydrogen, like formic acid, liquids. It's about heat exchange. So we can interconnect every technology with every energy carrier and make that go peer-to-peer on these systems. And by design, therefore, it's also a diversified system, because it will accommodate all kinds of users, producers, and uses for energy. What we talk about is symbiosis, because first we needed an energy system to be able to create the internet, but now we need the internet to uphold our energy system. So the one needs the other. You cannot have the one without the other anymore. So this is a state of symbiosis that we found in our energy reality. And one of the things that makes that possible is the uprise of the Internet of Things, the IoT. Already globally, more than 14 billion devices are connected to the Internet of Things. So these devices, most modern cars, most solar panel installations, wind turbines, you name them, industrial furnaces, but even our household appliances are IoT connected. All these devices have something to do with energy. Many of them use energy. All of them need energy. Many of them actually have energy production as a primary purpose, like solar panels. And many of them have energy as a residual flow, so as a secondary flow, like residual heat from an oven. Now, if we interconnect through IoT all these energy streams, you get a massive self-balancing energy system, which is called the Internet of Energy. And in practice, it kind of looks like this. So if you're fortunate enough to have an electric car, you have it on its charger, you can charge it with packets of energy from your solar panels. But maybe it might be easier at some point to also use the power of the solar panels from your neighbors. Maybe your car is full enough and then it will be a source of power to your office space. Maybe it will be a source of power to the water cooker of some of your neighbors. So on these local energy systems, you see that storage integrated with generation of energy provides this model for local balancing. And then we get an entire system that is continuously adapting itself to new realities. Now, what do we need to learn in order to be able to make this? And we do this together with tokenization clubs, with people that are in the solar industry. But combining IoT with energy makes peer-to-peer energy networks possible. And it kind of looks like the shift from a classical orchestra, where this is very centrally orchestrated. You have all the musicians there that are perfectly educated. They read their sheet music. They're sitting in front of their sheet music with their violins perfectly tuned. The director goes like this, they go like this. Sounds perfect, sounds beautiful. But the reality of the energy system today looks a lot more like a jam session. At any given moment, anyone can do anything, and then we have to adapt to it. Because we became prosumers of the system. We're no longer the consumers of the system. So this also gives us responsibilities. And like with music, just like with energy, the balance is not static. So this is the Moonlight Sonata by Beethoven. Beautiful piece of music, and you see that's always looking for new harmonies by moving through the music. So something changes, you play a different note, then you disrupt the balance that was there at that moment, then you have to adapt every note to create a new balance and a new harmonic setting. So this is how music works, and this is how energy systems work also. It's the same thing. It's the same principle that applies. And if you look at nature, this is a perfect example of a self-sustaining system where you have 20,000 birds in this beautiful flock. Now, which one of these birds is the boss bird, or the planning and control bird, or the navigation bird? There are none. The intelligence of the system is embedded within every organism that forms the system. And by adapting to each other, and by listening to the same algorithms, they actually fly through the sky in these beautiful, beautiful shapes without hitting each other. So this is how we can actually imagine new energy realities. How do we organize energy autonomy in these interconnected realities? One is we have to invest in local interconnectedness. Think no longer of one great energy network that is centrally orchestrated, but think of a network of many, many networks, millions of small networks. And these networks can be nested because you have your home network, then multiple home networks form one local network, then one local network together with other local networks form a regional network, then multiple regional networks form a national network, etc., etc. So you scale it up, but it's nested in its design. Now, if every network is 80% self-sustaining, on a local scale, because you integrate storage with buffering, with conversion, with energy generation, then all these 80% self-sustaining networks together, they already have a form of resilience. You can always fulfill your basic needs through that. And the more you scale up, the less stress you see on the system, because you basically multiply the resilience by resilience. So instead of solving problems on a central level, we have to learn to solve energy problems on a local level. We design energy systems to be 100% renewable based and free of lock-ins, because you should be free to choose any technology that you want and any supplier that you want, and still be interconnected to each other. So there's no vendor lock-in there, there's no data lock-in there. It's about systems integration, because it's about generation, it's about storage, it's about conversion, it's about seasonal buffering, and they all have to work together on these local levels. And it's about fulfilling basic needs with local resources, because even whatever happens somewhere in another country, we need to make sure that we can still fulfill our basic energy needs. So we need to regard energy as a basic need and therefore as a basic right on the local level, and we need to organize for that. The energy transition can be regarded as 4 simultaneous transitions. It's not only a technology transition where we shift one technology for another. It's an economical transition because we have to reframe value. We have to reframe the economy. We have to regard energy as the principal currency that creates all the value. We have to reframe societal systems, because you and I would be connected differently when we exchange energy peer-to-peer. And we have to reframe institutional systems, new laws, new regulations, new taxation schemes. And this is stuff that we get to work on. Now, what can we learn from our forests? I love nature. And I know that in this country you have the most beautiful forests because we came through them. Now, a forest, for me, is an example of a 100% renewable-based, ownerless, decentralized, distributed, waste-free, regenerative energy system. It's beautiful in its simplicity and in its diversity, but it has worked like this for thousands and thousands of years. And we need to apply the principles that we see in the forest in our technology of today. And there are ways to do that. But we have to regard that everything is connected with everything else. I sometimes call this energy Buddhism. Everything is connected with everything else. And also, we have to regard that the silver bullet solution is not one technology. It's not, we're going to go for solar, we're going to go for nuclear, we're going to go for this, we're going to go for that. No, it is diversity. It's combining diverse technologies and solutions that makes the entire system more resilient. One of the biggest inspirations for me in my work is artists. I love working with artists. Now, this is produced by an artist, and this is a dance floor in a dance club that generates energy by dancing on it. So there's piezo elements there. Now, the next step that we're going to do here is for the Tomorrowland festival in Belgium, huge dance festival, to get to a huge dance floor that not only generates energy through vibrations of dancing people, but also generates energy because there's thin film solar embedded within it. So you have these different combinations of technologies to generate new forms of energy. Pauline van Dongen, who's a Dutch artist, makes solar fabrics. So she integrates thin film technology in fabrics. So for example, imagine you're going to be wearing a coat that can also charge your phone. So these are beautiful things that artists come up with. And one of my favorite artists is Ermi van Oers, who I saw graduate once years ago. And she looked at plants and she was like, isn't a leaf of a tree also a form of a solar panel because it converts solar power into energy? And yes, it does. So she started to experiment with inserting anodes and cathodes in the root system of a plant and see if she could turn that into electrical energy. And yes, by now she's able to power LED light bulbs with plants just by using the power of nature. So this is why we actually can get so much inspiration from nature. And the last example I want to give to you is Sun Glacier by Ab Verheggen, who 2013 came to me and said, you know what I want to do? I want to make a glacier in the desert. And I was like, you're crazy. And he said, well, I want to do it. And he came up with a design and it kind of looked like this. And he said, I'm going to put solar panels in the desert and then I'm going to create a lot of electricity and then I'm going to have fluids run underneath these panels below 0 degrees, cooling them with that electricity, and then it's going to attract condensation from the sky, so the moist in the air is going to condense on these tubes and I'm going to be able to make ice. And he actually put it in a lab, 50 degrees Celsius, 10% humidity in the air, and he was able to make ice. And then he had 2 prototypes in the desert of Mali, in the Sahara. And they actually worked. So they provided electricity and fresh water for people in the middle of the desert just by using local, natural, renewable resources. This was actually funded by the Dutch Ministry of Defense because they regarded this as a conflict prevention technology. If people can provide their own needs by using the wealth of nature, then there's no need to fight over them anymore. And by now, at the last Expo 2020 in Dubai, Sun Glacier was the centerpiece of the Dutch pavilion, where they had a huge solar roof that condensated water from the air and created this perpetual waterfall, which was then again used to power or to feed a vertical farm. So they were farming crops in the desert with renewable energies by condensating water from the air. So this is why I love working with artists, because their mindset will open your companies up. And I believe that we should hire artists and put them in the strategic positions in our companies to create the future together with us. So in the end, I just want to say, imagine all the people sharing all the world, as John Lennon said so beautifully. My mission is very simple. It's universal access to clean and renewable and conflict-free energy. And I also want to invite you, because this is not only theory, this is being built right now. So next October 31st, we have the kickoff for Transform Hackathon, which is a large energy innovation hackathon in the Netherlands that I'm organizing, together with the Ministry of Economic Affairs and with some other beautiful organizations in the Netherlands. And I would love to invite you to bring teams, to bring your knowledge, and to together build the future of energy, because we can do that together. So I want to invite you to dream and to develop your dreams into action, because it's dreams developed into action that make all the difference. Thank you so much. So, do we still have time for a question, or?
It's possible, yeah. Má niekto nejakú otázku, ktorú by sa chcel takto narýchlo spýtať? Ja som nepozeral, či niekto písal do aplikácie, to už nestíhame, ale ak má niekto nejakú otázku? Maybe during the day.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Via application.
Yeah, and I'll be here also, so you can also always talk to me, because I'll be here the entire day. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.